Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Anchoring the Consciousness of Oneness World Summit. I'm Sarah Daves, co-host for this event, and today I'm interviewing Todd Hoskins, who is co-hosting with me, and today we're going to talk about what it means to move with the rhythms of life and the nature of shifting energies and the power that each one of us has to improve the world that we live in. Todd is a facilitator, coach, consultant, and advisor for personal growth and organizational design. He's passionate about the need for systemic change and how our society and workplaces are structured. He launched Canopy Gap in 2009, and that is a facilitation firm that leads to support organizations as they shift their perspective and practices. He is a writer and speaker on topics of trust, leadership, change, and collaboration. He's worked with nonprofits and startups, helping to launch over a dozen companies, and he's helped large organizations such as Microsoft or Verizon and Northwestern University. So thank you, Todd, for taking the time to interview with me today.
Thank you, Sarah. I always enjoy talking with you.
Yes, and thank you so much for your participation in this summit, and you have been an integral part of this, so I very much appreciate you for that. So tell me a little bit about, well, let's just start with Canopy Gap. Can you tell me a little bit about your organization and why you started it and what Canopy Gap means to you?
Sure. So the name Canopy Gap is a phenomenon that happens in every forest ecosystem, and that is there needs to be a way for life to grow on the forest floor. But as trees grow, they form a canopy, and somehow the light must get through. And there's different ways that light gets through. There's death of trees, there's falling trees, but there's also a mystery around this as to within the cycles of life, there's always room for growth at the bottom. And there's new evidence that trees actually communicate with one another in order to defend against dangers and pests, in order to send chemical nutrients to one another, and somehow in order to create openings so that the whole ecosystem can thrive. When I learned about Canopy Gaps a dozen years ago, I thought, wow, that's cool. And I love when science is exploring something that does not have an answer, but we are just on the verge of understanding so many new ideas about ourselves as humans, with neurology, with brain science, with epigenetics, and also there's so much about the natural world that just doesn't fit into the way that we have viewed things. So as you can tell, I'm inspired by nature and ecology. And what the metaphor means in terms of life is how can we be a part of these ecosystems, participate in the cycles of life that does bring new growth as organizations. But there are no organizations without individuals, so that there's always an individual component too.
Right. Okay. So that's really interesting. I'm too fascinated with the Canopy Gap and the forest ecosystem. So can we just kind of sit there for a minute? What is that like? Is that I'm imagining the roots of trees. So all this is kind of happening underground, and they're communicating, and their roots are connected and maybe intertwined, and they're able to recognize the needs of like a sister or brother tree or something, yes. And then notice when the new growth is coming and make room for that new growth to have the sunlight it needs to grow, like. I mean, yeah, this is reminds me of community, right? So this is how we operate as human beings when we have no choice, do we? So can you kind of expand on that a little bit? Like, just like the science behind that a little bit, because I think that is highly relevant to the theme of oneness here.
Oh, yes, definitely. So there's so much happening that we don't see. Um, and in the case of soil composition, there's something called mycelia. And these are actually fungal networks that connect plants and trees underneath the surface. They're very thin filaments, but these mycelial networks actually act as both a communication system and transfer of nutrients. So it means that when you look at a grove of trees, that those are not just individual trees, they are networked trees, that they have a give and take relationship that is facilitated by this mycelia. You mentioned like the sibling relationship. Well, in old growth forests, there usually develops a mother tree relationship within the grove that is typically the largest tree, has the largest store of nutrients, and can in a way take care of the younger trees in that grove.
Wow, that's amazing.
And they
Yeah.
don't have to be the same species either. So we just planted an aspen tree this summer in honor of my father-in-law, and the aspen tree lost its leaves very early, which I learned later is and this is just a little seedling, is normal for aspen trees, that they lose their leaves early. And I was worried about how is it going to survive through the fall without leaves. And it turns out that that other nearby plants typically help support the aspen tree at this stage of growth. So we are fully expecting when spring comes, there will be buds, even though, it was in September that it became just an awkward little stick in the ground. And you think, is that actually alive? And not only is it alive, it is connected to other plant life around it.
Wow. So, how does that concept translate to how humans interact?
Well, Fritjof Capra, who is one of my favorite thinkers, he's a physicist who's deeply interested in ecology. He says, whenever we look at life, we look at networks. And what he means by that is that both on a micro scale, the cellular structures of our body and not just our nervous system, but the way our body operates, it is a network. And then actually, it's estimated that somewhere between 40 and 50% of the cellular content in our human bodies are human cells. The rest is a mix of bacteria and other organisms that help support our life. So if you think of my body itself is a networked organism, and there's also all of these humans and non-humans in which I share space with. We know from studying the flow of energy in a tree, for example, that it follows a torus pattern. We also know that for the human heart, the electromagnetic energy that emanates from the human heart also follows a torus pattern. And so there is actually, when you and I are in proximity, our energy fields are interacting, our electromagnetic fields are interacting, and there is a level of connectedness between my networked body and your networked body. But then we also can carry that further and say that every action that I take in the world, whether it's taking a step, whether it's eating a bite of food, whether it's choosing to listen or talk, choosing to make eye contact with a stranger on the sidewalk, that we are impacting one another. And so life is a vast network of networks in which we are all impacting one another. And this has, huge implications for how we approach family life, how we approach romantic relationships, how we approach team building and team cohesiveness, how we approach organizations and their ecosystems, that we're not actually all separate entities. In our Western point of view, we are stuck in personal growth, for example. It is my personal growth. Well, actually, my personal growth is so intertwined with the state of being and the growth of those around me. And so I use the phrase stepping in, and that we have a responsibility, and we have a possibility and a responsibility to make choices to positively impact those networks that we are within. But it's not all up to us. We are continually impacting others and being impacted by others, whether or not, we're just not aware of how much that impact is.
Right. Yeah. So I'm thinking about the stories that we have that we make up in our minds, as we move through the world, interacting with other human beings, we truly are living our own movie. So we don't really know what's going on with the person who is right in front of us. But we can make a lot of assumptions about that, can't we? And so I'm thinking about, in the workplace. I mean, who hasn't had conflict in the workplace, right? We've all had conflict. We have all walked out of meetings before thinking that person sighed or rolled their eyes or shifted in their seat when I said this thing. I wonder what that means. Does that mean that they don't like me? Does that mean that I said something stupid? Well, I don't really know them anyway, and I don't really care how I feel or how they feel, because I don't have any feelings toward that. And then that separation occurs, and then the stories are created. And that person who is part of your story may never ever know, and it, of course, usually 99.9% of the time is not even the case. So do you when you're consulting with organizations, do you touch on that topic?
Yes. So it's my opinion that most work with organizations is happening at the external level. So the tangible, the visible, but there's also this invisible, this intangible, and we could use different words to describe it. We could talk about energy, we could talk about dynamics, and those energies and those dynamics are both created from within each person, and they mix together, and they create an energy in the room, or an energy in the store, or an energy in the building, to the extent where you can typically feel that when you walk into, let's say, retail establishments. You get a feel right away whether you're welcome there, whether you're not, whether the workers there are enjoying themselves, whether they're not, and we pick up all of these cues. And so the work of those dynamics is overlooked, largely because it's difficult to measure, it's difficult to see, and it's difficult to talk about. So those dynamics and those energies, my approach is we work at it on an individual level. What are you noticing within yourself? What are you noticing within the room? What are you noticing within your team? And then work on it directly at the team level or with a subset of all employees, that as we get into the work together or as we have a conversation about a project, let's notice what's happening that's not being spoken of. And so some of that work around dynamics is trying to make the invisible more visible, so that we can talk about it, so that we can be more creative, so we can be more our full selves and show up. And that's where a lot of the work that you've done around conflict becomes key, because if people don't feel safe, and if they don't feel like they have a voice, if they don't feel like they have a venue when there's tension that arises, then those people are not going to fully show up. I mean, what I want for this world is for people to have work in which they can fully be themselves for a purpose greater than themselves. And that purpose doesn't need to be organic shampoo. That purpose could be making fabulous tacking nails. And there's honor in that, especially when the team dynamics are there of we're doing this together, we support one another, and we have successfully balanced out those forces of cooperation and competition. Right now, most of our culture is too much on the end of competition and not enough on cooperation. Competition is healthy, but it's not healthy out of balance. And I actually get a little mad in talking about this, because people will refer to Darwinism, except Darwin did recognize the importance of cooperation in the evolution itself, and what we attribute to him is mostly survival of the fittest, which is killing us. It's not killing the so-called fittest because they're at the top of the food chain, but too many people are suffering in the systems that we live and work in.
Right. So yeah, because like the forest ecosystem, I mean, they're not keeping secrets from each other, are they? You know, no tree is trying to be the better tree or grow the tallest, or, you know, that sort of thing. And so that's where the ego, you know, that's the extra bonus we have as human beings, like our knowingness that, you know, that we're, well, just our consciousness. So like, what do we do with that? You know, like in the corporate world, it is the least safe to be able to show up as who you are. I'm not saying that vulnerability, like there's no place for it, because that is looked at as courage in a lot of situations. But really it's about it's getting down to business, and making sure that people are taking appropriate action. And it's not about feelings, you know. It's like, I don't remember ever having a conversation with a superior where feelings were ever important. So is this something that like you're bringing all of this stuff underneath, like this dynamic that nobody's talking about, but everybody's feeling it, just like the trees, right? But we're pretending that it's not happening. So yeah, so that's kind of the idea. But in thinking about that dynamic and how people are interacting sort of undercover, you know, that's where the confusion comes in. The stories are made up and all that, right? And so I mean, you can't necessarily just go up to a person and say, well, that you don't know, you're in a meeting and you're in the corporate world and you don't know how people are going to take things. So maybe you don't feel comfortable walking up to someone and asking, you know, what was that about? It made me feel this way. What would you tell that person? Like, I'm thinking about like where you said, like figure out where you are and who you are. And so where you are in that moment, like, is there something that people can do to pull themselves out of that and clear that underlying space where nobody sees, without bringing it to the surface. Is that possible?
Yes. So I think for quite a while now, there's been a lot of talk, even in the business world, about self-awareness and the importance of self-awareness, which I think is incredibly important. And we need to expand our definition of awareness to also include collective awareness, so that it's not all my reflection is not focused on me, that I'm also able to see what's happening with others and between others. And then we need skills for how to navigate that in-between space. And this is really part of the new frontier. And how do we develop those skills of deeper collaboration, that aren't just about getting the work done, but are about connecting as human beings. Right. I encourage everyone to watch the Joe Weston interview today, because the methodology that he developed for how people can meet within a workplace is incredibly effective, coming from my personal power to your personal power without causing harm. And so those in-between spaces where egos collide, where energies collide, there's a skill set in how do I make sense of this, and then there's also a skill set of how do I work with this. And let me give you one example. Most of us avoid friction and tension at all costs, and I put myself in that camp. I think it was Brene Brown who said, you can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you can't have both at the same time. And this world needs courageous people. And part of that courage is the determination, the commitment to work with tension, work with friction. And that's both on an internal level of I'm feeling unease. I recognize that I don't like to speak up in a meeting. And I'm willing to talk about that, or I'm willing to speak up, or I'm willing to have an inquiry with myself as to why I don't speak. And the tensions that come up for us every day at work and outside of work. My beloved and I, this is almost a daily thing of when you're in a long-term relationship. It's a practice field for working with tension, because my stuff collides with her stuff, not daily, but sometimes almost daily. So we have all of these places to practice working with tension, but we need to be able to understand both the value of tension, of how we work with tension, and then we need practice in doing it.
Yeah. And so that the dynamic, the romantic connection dynamic, is probably for most the hardest one to figure out and to find peace within. So that's where a lot of stories are created. And so one of the things that in conflict resolution that we teach is when a conflict comes to the surface, it means that there's a wound that's ready to be healed. And so it's actually a gift. So the conflict is the gift. And then you have the opportunity to cross the bridge into mutual understanding, right? So when you find yourself feeling emotionally triggered in some way, one of the things that I do, and I teach my clients, is I have them ask themselves, what do I need to know about how I'm feeling right now? Right? So, and that is the one of the true paths to self-mastery. So, like, yes, we definitely need to be paying attention to the interactions of others and how we're interacting with people and communicating with them. Like, be like the trees, you know, like let go of the ego and just be like the trees. But usually we are in the midst of our own stories, aren't we?
Yes, yes. So sometimes I like putting on my evolutionary hat and just thinking from an evolutionary perspective, why might this be true? And I just read something this week that perhaps depression that is widespread in Western culture right now has an evolutionary purpose in that as human beings, we want to be our true selves, and the disconnect that can happen, not in all forms of depression, but depression becomes a signal that we're off the path of our true selves. And I think the same way with long-term relationships is we tend to partner with people who provoke all of the stuff in ourselves that we really need to look at and work on. And that's maddening. It's really maddening that you have this wonderful honeymoon phase and you see your partner is perfect and it's just, there's an ease and you're energized. And then you move into this transition where you're starting to see things differently. And that's when all of the triggers happen. And why not just believe that these are here for a purpose? These are here, that every trigger is an invitation for not just me to deepen into my own sense of being, but for us to deepen into our relationship. That's really hard work. Mm-hmm. It's hard work because it means that we have to notice right away that we need to keep a check on our reactions, that we need to do this quick inventory, and then we need to be able to communicate in as clean a way as we can. This is true to a lesser extent in the workplace as well. You're not going to get the same level of triggering, but you will. It happens. So some of that skill building that we need for the places that we meet is necessary. And for me, you know, some of those are internal places between who I actually am and who I think I am, or who I actually am and who I think I should be. There's tensions that happen between that all the time.
Right. Yeah. And so that's what's keeping us from showing up whole or feeling whole. The fragmentation. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
I think fragmentation is a way of looking at it. Yes.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage to confront. It takes a lot of courage to confront myself. I talk about intentional discomfort. So most people know that, or it's a standard principle that growth comes through hardship. That our periods of most intense growth are when we're going through soul-trying times. And I think that principle holds true, but can be something that's chosen, not thrust upon me. So for me to bring up a difficult topic with my son is choosing intentional discomfort, because I don't want to really have this conversation, and yet I'm choosing discomfort. I'm going into a place where growth is possible when I choose that discomfort. In the workplace, that's true is as well. And how do I interact with my peers? What are ways in which I'm not just being provocative and challenging, but I have a conviction, or I have a boundary that needs to be placed. The ability to step into that discomfort is not just good for you, it's good for the other, and it's good for organizations. To be able to work with that tension at scale is so exciting. Imagine how creative and flourishing organizations would be, because I really think that, you know, difference is a huge source of energy. Anytime there's dissonance or difference, just like in romantic relationships, part of the energy and the attraction is difference. In the workplace, when we see things differently, when we have different experiences in life, and this applies to skin color, gender, any way in which you're different, that's a potential for energy. So working with that difference and working with that dissonance is one of the things we need most in our world right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that. That's duality of oneness, right? So, but we're all so different. We can very clearly see that, you know, and that's that which separates us, right, in this 3D reality that we live in. But it's necessary, and this is what I talk about. It's necessary for us to recognize those differences, and then, like you said, come together, and that creates an energy, and then we notice the connection, right? So it's like our separation is necessary in this experience in order for us to discover the oneness, the connection. Yeah.
The interview with Brian Reeves, we talk a little bit about the dangers of merging, and imagining oneness as merging. And I thought later that night, after I had talked with Brian, about a story from a teacher that I had, in which she said one of her students had just bonded very tightly with this big, giant, probably mother tree. And she told her teacher that I felt myself merging with the tree. I felt that happen. And the teacher said, try to not let it go that far. Try to recognize the treeness of the tree and the you-ness of the you, and the overlap between, without collapsing in. And part of that for me is like, oneness is not the merging itself, it is the respect and dance of a diverse set of energies that together create the oneness. And that is true in organizations as well. You know, diversity and inclusion are not just good practices for being publicly accountable. Diversity and inclusion are necessary to be creative, thriving organizations, especially if you can see diversity as not just something that's external, your religion, your gender, your skin color, but something that is ways of moving through the world, ways of thinking, ways of perceiving, skill sets. If we can think about that, all those forms of diversity, and being able to dance with that difference, then I'm excited as to what could shift in this world.
Yeah. And so you've said that we live in a unique time. So these kinds of conversations are happening more and more. And so we're noticing a shift, right? When we have like oneness summits going on, this is the only one. So what's so special about right now?
So it's hard for me to hold on to this all the time because many days I'm just heartbroken, and many days I'm discouraged because it does feel like the fabric that has held us together is starting to become threadbare. That institutions are weakening. That we've talked about so many different systems that are failing us: our education system, our prison system, our financial system, the level of worker disengagement. I know Edelman, the PR firm, does their annual trust survey, and their numbers this year said that 85% of people said the system is failing them. And that's my experience. And the other side of that is that with the crumbling, there is a creating at the same time. I think Joanna Macy calls it the great turning. Are we participating in the turning? I also think about birth, though I've never given birth myself. I've witnessed it, and the seeming chaos of the process of birth. It feels wild and out of control. And so on my good days, I choose to believe that we are essentially in that birthing process, because as things crumble, as worldviews and ways of being no longer work, they will be replaced. And we know that there's dangers of what they can be replaced with autocratic leadership, with more inequality. Those are risks we face. And at the same time, the capacity of spirit and the capacity of human spirit, whether you see it as God or source, there's something else that's happening. And that great turning, you and I have conversations like this on a regular basis. And we see amazing things happening in the world. And we see people who are just a bit more open and curious. Just yesterday, I was on a global call in which we were meditating for lasting peace. And 6 individuals from the Netherlands just held the Americans on the call about the turmoil that we're experiencing in our country right now, the upheaval and the hardship of that. And there was such compassion for us. And it was like, yes, they are connected to us. They are part of the same experience. So I want to bring my own agency to that great turning without feeling like it's up to me. This phrase came to me a couple weeks ago that's been one of my personal mantras lately is I and we, it's not up to me, and yet I can take a step. And it's those steps in which we build momentum, and we learn about who we are and where we are and see new possibilities. I would love to see a completely reinvigorated society operating under different principles. And the truth is, we can get there, but it takes one step at a time.
Yeah, I love that. I love that a lot. It, because without stress, we can't have change, right? And so, and we've watched, or we can look back through history and see all of the necessary steps that had to occur, whether we agree with it or not, in order for us to get to where we are. It's created our ways of thinking and being and moving in the world. And so like you're talking about like witnessing, a child being born, and it is so chaotic. There is no, you don't check boxes. You have no idea what's going to happen. And so, yeah,
And
so
I mean, it's scary to witness. I'm imagining that it's scary to actually be the birthing mother too, but it's scary to witness. And these are scary times, and yet look what could emerge.
yeah, it's actually pretty exciting. It's actually so, and I've seen us move collectively, at least in my movie. What I'm noticing out in the world, I'm seeing us moving from like being completely horrified, right? In the last, I don't know, year and a half, to like and then like going through the grief process where it's like, it's not true. Like the state of the country we live in is, like, and then it's like it hits you and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so depressing. And then it's like tears and it's so sad. But then it's like on the other side of that, because you can't exist there. I mean, some people have and said, you know what, I'm not watching the news anymore. I'm not going to get on social media and listen and watch, the state of our nation. And this is just in the US, so, but this is where I am. Okay. So then you get to the other side of that and you're like, wow, okay. So what if this thing needed to happen in order for us to look at everything differently? I mean, because I'm thinking about like, the, I'm thinking about like how the teachings of, the sacred texts are taught, right? And how people interpreted them, right, over time. And so, that has changed. That has changed. And then the West took on the East, thought process or spiritual thought process and turned it into something very individual, and then kind of created this like idea that is pervasive that we're actually moving out of right now, but it was still pervasive, that I am detached and I don't worry about what's going on out there because the only thing I can control is what's going on in here. But then that disconnects you again. So we needed to get to that place, right? Because we can't just melt into each other. We have to create we are separate beings. We can see it in matter, that's our reality here in the 3D. That's not necessarily the truth, but that's what we're experiencing right now. And then to move into another place where we're dancing in unison and recognizing the connection. So you talked about moving from goal orientation to horizon orientation. And I'm really interested in knowing the difference between that and if that connects.
There is a connection there. So in my organizational work, I would talk about this as the limitations of strategy. That our ability, both in our individual lives and our work lives, to map out how we get from point A to point B is our default operating system. And along with that, from point A to point B, there's a set of skills that are needed. So we need to be able to analyze to determine what is the best path. We need to be able to plan so that we can know how to get from point A to point B. These are all important and necessary skills, and we have both forgotten and need a rediscovery of a way of moving that is not around tasks, goals, and our current notion of productivity. So the truths that I see underlying this point A to point B is we are in a universe that's constantly in motion. everything is in motion. Even the molecules within a rock are in motion. So anything that we think is static is not static. So our planet is moving, the sun is moving, we are moving, all of these cells in our body are moving. So everything is in motion. And we have this experience of the world changing fast right now, which seems to just speed that up. So if we take that point of view, if we understand that, then we see that any location of point A and point B is a delusion. Because actually, I can't know exactly where I am or where we are as an organization, because the minute I say we're here, we've actually moved somewhere else. We're living systems. We're in constant movement. And that B, which we could think of as the goal, that we take a step towards the goal, and all of a sudden we realize that, well, that's not really the goal that's going to produce the most well-being, or produce the most happiness, or produce the most attention, or whatever is needed. So let's not lose that goal orientation. It helps me on a daily basis to have a goal orientation. But how can we supplement that with the idea of this movement or momentum, to understand that my energy is always moving in a certain direction, and the people around me are always moving in certain directions? Can we locate that, not in a precise way, or actually kind of in a precise way, and then understand what are the possibilities of movement from here? Okay, so I'm a manager at work, and instead of putting together a 3-year plan or a 1-year plan, really understanding where is my team at, where is our product or our services at, where is this so-called market at, where are people at, where is the energy at, and where are some possibilities we can move from here. And then once we move into the possibilities, then we can start to see new horizons. But what we have to suspend is this idea that we put blinders on and we just walk in that direction because that's our stated goal. I do that regularly, and I have my own. I'm a Trello board user, and I do daily Kanban, and I'm a taskmaster for myself. And I, at the same time, recognize that the most important things in life are never finished. They're always keep going. And so the horizon, you never reach the horizon. You move towards the horizon, but as you move over the curved surface of the earth, the horizon continues to be out there. And that can drive me and other people crazy, that there's some things that can't be completed. But that's also what we need, are those horizons. Lasting peace is a horizon. An organization that's committed to the well-being of all of its employees, all its customers, and all its communities that it works within is a horizon. Because how do you define well-being? How do you measure that? Well, we can attempt to scale that back to a place where we can start to get some indications of whether we're getting there, but it will always be a horizon. So horizons are often the things that people say, that's too much. You can't do that. And it's what our heart longs for, especially when we're open and connected, is that we want to move towards those horizons. But let's not do that all but through planning and execution. Let's do that all by taking steps into possibilities and seeing where we're at.
Wow. So, and you mentioned that the corporation that has everyone's best interest at heart as a horizon. What does that look like in the family dynamic?
Oh. Oh, Sarah, I wish I had more just like tangible examples of that, because I know it exists, and it exists in moments in our family here. I often realize that I have become too firm and structured and not exhibited enough flexibility. And this actually happened to me this week in relation to my beloved, in which I had basically laid out some ground rules. And it became evident to me that those ground rules were for my own self-protection. That was not what was pointed towards the horizon for our family. That was me trying to, and I can honor this, I was trying to take care of myself, but I was also defaulting into a rules-based approach, which, whether you are an individual, a family, a couple, or an organization, the more that we can be oriented around principles rather than rules, the better. Rules are necessary for maintaining safety, for maintaining equality. We need governance. We need clear guidelines. Those are all important. But when you get into the realm of relationship, principles are something that we know or we believe is true, that can help guide our actions. And yet the application of those principles is going to vary based upon context. And so one thing it does is it encourages into dialogue. Because we can't just say you broke the rule or you followed the rule. It's a little murky. It's a little messy. So if I would have entered this tension with my beloved in a principle-based way, it would have been, here are some guiding beliefs that are dear to me that I think apply to this situation. Do you see them the same way? Yes, no, let's work that out. And then how do we apply these to this situation, knowing that the next time we're going to need to apply it differently? So the goal orientation is deep within my bones, and the rule-based approach, especially in times of fear, like that's what a lot of what I feel we're dealing with right now is a rule-based relief to our fear and anxiety. Yeah. And it takes courage to say, no, we'll be in dialogue. We're going to work off of principles. And that's hard.
Yeah, that is hard. It's not how we were taught to move in society. So you talk about rules, and that is a fear-based approach, because the rule makers who make the rules make them to protect themselves, right? Not necessarily always to protect everyone else. And the rules also don't usually apply to the rule makers too, does it?
That's a whole topic, yes.
Yeah, a whole nother topic. But so then you've got this fear-based plan, which is I'm going to make a rule, or you are stepping into your values, and that's coming from a place of love. So you're coming from love or fear, and that translates into, in our world, rules or values. So if you're coming from a place of love, then you're acknowledging the values that are important to you, and you are communicating them with another person and having a dialogue. And there's your connection, right? And that's the connection that's going on below the surface, like with the trees. Maybe that's how we can be the trees.
Yes, I see that as the visual, the mycelium being those interactions that we have. One of the things I say often in my organizational work is every interaction matters. And not to take that on as pressure of I have to do every interaction right, but whether you're on Facebook or whether you're in a retail store or on a phone with a client or you're in a meeting, it doesn't, every interaction contributes to what the overall culture is. And we need to address the environments in which those interaction happens. We need, for the mycelium example, it's the quality of the soil. Like the soil needs to be able to sustain those fungal networks so that they can do that sending nutrients back and forth that is necessary. If the soil is parched or without enough life and humus, then the trees can't communicate.
Mm. Wow. Wow, that's really something to think about. It's everything that is important to all of us all the time. I think that's what you're saying here.
There's power in that, and it takes a level of trust that I don't need to do it perfectly, that I'm not going to show up with my full self all the time. And I deeply believe that every person has a level of genius which is contributing to the entire planetary ecosystem. It doesn't matter what your education is, your skills are, your background, that we need each one of those people and what they bring. This is not something to take on of, I've got to do this conversation right. I've got to make sure that I'm always doing things right. You know, one of my things I'm working on right now is relaxing and not striving, because my being is where that genius is. It's not actually my doing. The doing originates out of that being. And in order to get to that state of being, there's some work I need to do, but pretty much it's relaxing into that essence. And I find that hard because I'm a habitual striver. And recognizing that the most important contributions that I have made and will make are when I'm actually not pushing myself, not trying to make a difference, that difference just comes because I'm being who I am.
Yeah. You're not trying to add on anything. You're just really trying to release things. Mm-hmm. It's like taking away, not adding on. And we think we constantly, our egos tell us we should add this on, add this badge, this certification, this, right. Goal that, accomplishment or whatever. But really, we are perfect. Just like, yeah. I think that's a wonderful place to close our interview today. Thank you so much, Todd.
Oh, thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us today and all of the work that you have done for the summit and all of your help. I appreciate it so much. I don't know that what I would have done without you, but the universe is perfect. And so and
you are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much. And so, okay, so if you want to know more about Todd, then you can go to canopygap.com. And if you have any questions for him about this interview or anything else, you can, I'm sure, reach him through canopygap.com, but also you can post your question in the Facebook group which you have a link to in your emails that have been coming through each day. And so thank you everyone for joining us today and joining us for Todd's interview. And until next time, we'll see you then, and take care.